The big question this morning, am I live or am I recording? Well, I confess I am a recording. I guess I could wait and have you ask me a question to see if I could respond to it. Then you would confirm that I am in fact a recording. I am recording this Bible study in the front of my mother's house in Lompoc, California, where I am visiting her. I decided to make a recording so I could stay a couple of extra days. I hope you've got your coffee and you've had some good snacks this morning. And on Sunday when I'm back, you can let me know how great those snacks were. For the past couple of weeks, a focus within our country and also around the world has been, of course, all of the celebrations surrounding the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Celebrations meant to honor her, to honor the life that she lived. And she has certainly been in many ways a wonderful queen, someone who has been admired. Of course, with her death then comes the transition in the monarchy. And so we move from Queen Elizabeth II to King Charles III. And so far it's been a smooth transition. If you know anything about history and the history of monarchies in various countries, you know that transitions in the monarchy are not always smooth, and that many times moving from one monarch to the other has a huge impact on a country. King Herod, who was known as Herod the Great, was a controversial symbol and a controversial monarch for the nation of Israel. There were several reasons for that. One of them was because he was not Jewish. King Herod was Idumean. That was his ancestry. He was from an area that was south of Israel, although in the general vicinity. That meant he was an Edomite. He was a descendant of Esau, not a descendant of Jacob. So even though he could count Abraham as his ancestor, his lineage was not through the lineage of Jacob. And so he could never officially be a real king of Israel. Herod was appointed king by Octavius Caesar and the Roman Senate in 40 BC. Originally, he was appointed as governor in 47 BC. Even though he was not Jewish, he understood things about the Jewish religion, though, because his father, Antipater, was a convert to Judaism. His mother, Cyprus, was a Nabatean, which meant that she was part of a nomadic tribe of Arabs who roamed the Arabian desert. Now, an ironic twist to all of this is that the Nabateans, as a tribe, eventually embraced Christianity as their dominant religion. Now, that was many years later. But Herod was not Jewish, but understood things about the Jewish religion. And one of the things he understood was how important the temple was to Jewish worship. And so the temple that had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, King Herod began rebuilding. He began that rebuilding process in 20 BC, and it took a number of years, but the thing that he did was he built a larger temple, at least a larger temple area, than had been in existence at the time of Solomon's temple. So he expanded the property around the temple. It had many more courts, and it was a lavishly built structure. The inside of the temple was covered over with gold. Scholars describe it as having been beautiful, and of course I assume it was, especially if you like gold. If you're not real fond of gold, then you may not have liked it very much. Herod had a reputation as a builder. Besides the temple in Jerusalem, he also built temples to Roma, Augustus, and to Baal. He built 4 palaces. He also built entire cities like Caesarea Martina. In addition to that, he built gymnasiums, which was where the games were played, what we would think of as Olympic type sports. He also built baths and fountains and markets and many other public buildings throughout the Eastern Roman Empire. He embraced the Roman occupation of Israel, and that's one of the reasons why he was able to be appointed there as king. He was very politically astute. Now, how do we know all of this? Because if you've read the Bible about Herod the Great, you know he's only mentioned a couple of times. Well, we know about it through ancient historians like Josephus, who wrote quite a bit about Herod the Great. And then we know about it through archaeological discovery. You see, as we have been looking at New Testament archaeology this month, one of the things that I've said before, I'll say again, is that historians and archaeologists work together. One reinforces the other. And so when there is an archaeological find, one of the things the archaeologists will do is check the ancient historians. They also check modern scholarship because modern scholars have done a lot of research for them. And so they check to see if what they have found is reinforced by what ancient historians have written. And Josephus being one of those who tells us quite a bit. So it's important in archaeology when you find something to be able to confirm that what you believe it is then reinforced by other what are called primary sources. Now, when I was in grad school, it was very important. Anytime I wrote any kind of a project, I had to work from primary sources as well as secondary sources. So a primary source would be, for example, when I wrote a paper about John Wesley, I had to include in that paper some of Wesley's writings, which of course we have. That would be considered a primary source. A secondary source would be a book written by an historian about John Wesley. When it comes to understanding things in the Bible, as much as we can, we want to be able to go back to primary sources. Next week, when we talk about the New Testament in the Bible study, one of the things I will be presenting is the fact that we have many, many, many primary sources that reinforce the New Testament. Not just archaeological finds, but also manuscripts. We have more manuscripts for the New Testament than for any other ancient document. And those would be considered primary sources because they reinforce what we read in the Bible. So when it comes to an historical character like Herod the Great, we want to get back as far as we can to what would be considered primary sources, historians, manuscripts from that era, as well as archaeological finds. So to find Herod's name on archaeological sites helps reinforce the fact that Herod had a hand in the construction of a particular structure that an archaeologist might find. Herod had 10 wives, 2 of whom he murdered. Upon his death, he had 4 sons who were still living. He had previously murdered 2 of his sons. As I said in the message on Sunday, one person wrote that it was safer to be Herod's pig than to be one of Herod's sons because Herod didn't eat pork. So he wouldn't be killing his pigs. Upon his death, his kingdom, which was a very large part of what we would call Israel, was divided among 3 of his 4 sons. Archelaus was given Judea and Samaria. Antipas was given Galilee and Perea. Philip II was given Trachonitis. By the way, Antipas was the Herod that Jesus went before after his arrest. When Pontius Pilate sent him to Herod, it was Herod Antipas that he sent him to, because he was the king over Galilee. And when Pontius Pilate was told that Jesus was from Galilee, he said, let Herod deal with this. So he sent him to Herod, who happened to be in Jerusalem at that time. Other members of Herod's family are mentioned in the Bible. His fourth son, Philip I, his granddaughter, Herodias, his grandson, Herod Agrippa, his great-grandson, Herod Agrippa II, three great-granddaughters, Bernice, Drusilla, and Salome. It's a big family. But when you have 10 wives, you can end up with a big family. Now, Herod died of multiple health issues. He had cancer, he had kidney disease, and he also had gangrene. He planned his own funeral. Now, last week we talked about planning your own funeral. But Herod had a strange plan for his funeral. When he knew he was going to die, he assumed no one was going to grieve the loss of Herod, that they would not mourn his death, as many people have mourned the death of Queen Elizabeth II, and for very good reasons. You see, Herod was a very violent man. I've already mentioned he killed 2 wives, he killed sons. We know from Matthew chapter 2, when Herod found his kingdom perhaps threatened, he ordered that babies and toddlers in and around Bethlehem would be murdered. So he was a vicious man. The plan he had for his funeral was he had some Jewish leaders arrested and issued the order that upon his death, all of those Jewish leaders who were arrested would be killed. Since he thought no one would mourn his death, in his diseased mind, at least there would be mourning at the time of his death, as people mourned the death of these Jewish leaders. Fortunately, his son, who became king over Israel, at least the Judea portion of Israel, did not follow through with these orders. Herod Agrippa I, his grandson, is mentioned in Acts chapter 12. He's the one who killed James, the brother of John. James being then at that time the first apostle to die. Herod Agrippa I was also the king who made a public spectacle of himself, dressing himself in shiny robes so the sun would hit him, with the hopes that people would see him and consider him a god because of the way he looked. And it was shortly after that that he then also died. Herod Agrippa II is mentioned in Acts 25 and 26. When Paul had been arrested by Festus, Herod Agrippa II, along with his sister, came to visit and wanted to hear from Paul. And so they brought Paul before him, and Paul testified to his faith in Jesus, explained how he became a Christian. And it was Herod Agrippa II who then said to him, "Do you think in such a short time you can persuade me to become a Christian?" So Herod Agrippa II knew exactly what Paul was going to do. So my question to you is, Who's the current king of Israel? There isn't one, is there? No. In fact, there hasn't been a king of Israel for a very long time. But what happened to this Herodian family that had ruled for so long, starting with Herod the Great, and then the kingdom being divided among three sons, and then grandsons taking over? What happened to them? Well, in 70 AD, the temple was destroyed because of the rebellion of the Jewish people. And so the temple that Herod the Great had refurbished, expanded, turned into such an amazing edifice, was destroyed by the Romans because of the rebellion of the Jewish people. By 100 AD, no Herod family member was in a position of ruling in any form at all. As I said, Herod had strong political instincts. He had a drive, he had great drive to be king, even though he wasn't qualified to be king. He was also ruthless and evil, and eventually he died. His kingdom was divided, and his kingdom eventually crumbled. What's the lasting memory of Herod? Well, he built a temple that no longer exists. He built many other temples and palaces and other structures, and they've all crumbled. They're all gone. What's a lasting memory we have of Herod? It's not a good one. That because he feared losing his throne, he had a group of babies and toddlers murdered. That's not very much, is it? It's really not very much. Known as the builder, and yet everything he built was gone. Herod's life reminds me of something we read when we were studying through the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapter 6, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Earthly kingdoms crumble. We can say in our time, businesses crumble, don't they? Have you been to a Toys R Us lately? They're gone. 700 stores at the time that the company decided to close. Now, I have great memories of Toys R Us. When my son had finally reached that point where he understood some things about money. He'd received some money for his birthday, usually from his grandparents. And one of the great joys was to take Alexander to Toys R Us and let him wander the action figure rows, choosing what he would purchase with his birthday money. And he was always very careful with his money, and it took a lot of time. He didn't just run into the store, see something shiny, grab it, and leave. He wanted to make a very careful search because he knew he only had a limited amount of money. But it was a great experience for us, a father and a son, to go into Toys R Us and be able to do that. And of course, Toys R Us no longer exists. Businesses crumble. One very that's very personal to me. Cannot go to Orchard Supply Hardware anymore and get my free train calendar every Christmas time. Orchard Supply Hardware was a hardware store that started as a nonprofit entity in California, eventually became a for-profit entity, grew to the point where Sears bought it, and then it was bought by several other people. I think Lowe's owned it just before it closed down completely. But I used to love those train calendars. I can't do that anymore. Doesn't exist. And the last year that they were open, they didn't even produce a train calendar. And I love train calendars. Earthly kingdoms crumble, businesses crumble, even churches. Even churches crumble. In 1996, a pastor named Mark Driscoll started a church in Seattle, Washington. It's called Mars Hill. It grew. Eventually, Mars Hill was in 15 locations in 4 different U.S. states. They had a weekly attendance of 12,000 and an online viewership of about 200,000 to the weekly messages. Today, Mars Hill no longer exists. I'm not going to go into all of the reasons why. They're not nice ones. They're not good ones. But it's heartbreaking that a church that could grow to such a large size no longer exists at all. Now, you guys know that I'm not anti-large church. I've worked for quite a few churches of 2,000 and more. And I really enjoyed working at those churches. I also enjoy working at small churches. I don't think every church needs to become a church of thousands. But the thing that I think is important to understand is that these things that we create, kingdoms, businesses, even churches, those are not the eternal things. Jesus wants us to never forget the importance of the eternal. It's a very important part of life now, not just life then. When you think about someone from history like King Herod and his sons who followed him, mentioned in the New Testament, and when I first became a Christian and first began reading the New Testament, I assumed every Herod that was mentioned was the same person until I realized, oh no, that one died, so this is a different one. But I didn't know the history then. But kingdoms crumble. Businesses crumble. Churches can crumble. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Fortunately, our faith is not dependent upon a kingdom or really any country. There are Christians in every country in the world, but our faith is not dependent upon that country, whether it's the United States or it's Britain or it's France or some other country. Businesses crumble, and it's always heartbreaking because when a business closes, people lose their jobs. And many times people will even lose some of their retirement benefits and things like that. And so it's disappointing and it can be very stressful. And of course, churches can sometimes close down. But those are all things that even though they touch on eternity, they're not the eternal things. And so Jesus wants us to make sure that we focus important time and attention on those things that are eternal, that we store up in heaven our treasures there, that treasures in heaven are of prime importance to us. And so who we are and how we impact people, that's important. How we love the people around us, that's important. The next thing I would like you to do, and this video is nearly at an end, But the next thing I would like you to do is watch a video that someone produced of what Solomon's temple probably looked like. It's not a video of what Herod's temple probably looked like, but it is a good one of what Solomon's temple probably looked like. And if all of the links I sent came through correctly, then you'll be able to do that. Well, I will be back with you on Sunday, and then I'll be back at Bible study next Thursday, where we will study the New Testament documents and find what does archaeology tell us about the New Testament, and how has archaeology helped to reinforce the validity of the New Testament as an ancient document. I'll also leave you guys to share your prayer requests and pray for one another. And I look forward to seeing you again. And God bless you.